Hi, everybody. We are so lucky to have with us today Dr. Laurel Mellon. She's the founder of Emotional Brain Training, or as they call it, EBT, and she's a neuroscience based, which is EBT is a neuro-based solution to stress, which we all know is something we need to figure out how to deal with. She's a health psychologist and association clinical professor of family and community medicine and pediatrics School of Medicine, University of California in San Francisco. But on top of everything else, she's also, Dr. Mellon is a New York Times bestselling author. I believe she's going to really help you to understand how to deal with the pandemic stress, with all the stress, whatever the situation, which will help the employers, help the employees, and so on and so on. So without further ado, Dr. Mellon, if you would elaborate a little bit more on your background and what you would like our audience to know a little bit more about, and we can't wait for your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Patty, and really wonderful to be collaborating with your beautiful organization. And I'm looking forward to sharing this information with you if you're watching, because who isn't stressed out right now? I'll tell you a little bit about my background, because what the message today that I'm going to give you is one of hope and clarity based on science. And of course, I've been at UCSF for really a long time. I don't even want to say how long. And during that time, I got really lucky. I started working with some very smart people, and I began to try to go to the root cause of why are we depressed? Why are we anxious? Why are we procrastinating? And why do we have all these stress-related diseases? And I happened upon some old research buried in the literature that showed me it was all about connection. And I started using the tools for connection many years ago, and I saw astonishing changes that I had no brain science to support and wouldn't have that brain science for more than 20 years. But I knew I would spend my career trying to figure it out with many other very brilliant people who believe what I believe, which is people can change. It's just that we need to know what's going on in the brain so we can give them the tools to do that. So now more than 500,000 people have used EBT, and it's really started a whole movement with EBT. It's more than just a method. It's saying, look, we have this beautiful emotional brain. We have 5 different pathways in that brain that take us out of even toxic stress that causes shutdowns, overwhelm, a lot of medical expenses, and moves us up to a state of connection and well-being and purpose. We're not using those pathways. We only use the thinking pathway, and that's about 2 of the 5, and it's the least important of those. So this is about empowering the individual and empowering organizations and leaders to move forward with this brain-based health movement, which is all about people being able to use their brains in amazing new ways based on science so that it can be their best self, happy, healthy, of purpose. And so that's what I want to tell you about. And when stress and COVID, when that came around, I thought this is an incubator for stress in the brain. It's everything the brain doesn't like. It's complete surprise. It's overwhelm, and everything that matters on a very primitive basis. The brain counts on everything staying the same in that way, and everything changed. So there's a huge disruption to the brain. And it turns out that just about everybody's stressed, which after you watch this video and hear these ideas, I hope you'll say, oh, everyone's stressed. That's really a problem, because stress is the root cause of most emotional health problems, behavioral health, work problems, and even chronic diseases. But I hope you'll also say it's a moment of opportunity to change the brain. Because when we're in real stress, if we do it a different way, if we do a different emotional dance, essentially, we can actually change our basic expectations and change more rapidly than you can imagine. Otherwise, it's a slow, sludging pathway to change. So I'm going to just say, stress shows up a lot of different ways. People can shut down, people can be hostile, people can put a great big smile on, but inside their physiology is really going wild. So it shows up different ways. And I want you to know that the way it shows up oftentimes is in medical problems. We live in a society that suppresses emotions. You have to put on a happy face, and you have to follow the protocols, which is really important. But there's no internal, private way to process your emotions. And if you don't process those wild and woolly emotions, what happens is they go underground, they create physiological stress, and they create work stalls, health problems, problems at home and everywhere. So what we're talking about is this woman that you're seeing here is just stuffing her feelings. And she knows how to think her way out of it. She knows how to go for a walk or or exercise. Maybe she knows how to meditate. But these stressors are happening 24/7, and we need to empower our employees and our population in the simple tools to control the stress in their emotional brain, which is easy to learn, so she doesn't have to just swallow her stress and brood and come home at night and maybe go to excess, maybe just go to bed, because she can actually stop the stress in her brain right on the spot. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So you can see on the next slide, oops, you can see on the next slide that stress and COVID-19 essentially exacerbated the stress levels that were already high. And what happens is stress also is at the root of the comorbidities that make COVID more dangerous. And it also, chronic stress suppresses the immune system. So, I mean, everyone is saying, gosh, I need to do something about my stress. One really important point is that the stress in your brain, which is psychological, so to speak, it's also circuits that change all of your physiology, but brain stress and body stress are a two-way street. So let's say you have an employee who's really having anxiety attacks. Well, let's say they're having intense anxiety. Well, you could treat the symptom of anxiety, but underneath that is a whole body and brain that's out of balance and in stress. And the stress in the brain that's psychological goes into the body, and then they get stomach aches and headaches and all sorts of other chronic problems. And then the stress in the body goes back to the brain and creates more emotional problems. So it's a two-way street. You're always treating both brain and body stress, and that's why you need to step back and say, okay, how can we get at the whole system, the whole body and brain, to clear away this stress? And what has happened is we came into this COVID-19 completely unprepared to deal with this level of stress. And that's just how it was. We know that now that distress levels have gone way up. It went from 22% of people were stressed out a year ago, and now it's 70% of people. So essentially, when people are in stress overload, everything that could go wrong does. And the idea is to go to the root cause, which is the brain in stress, and learn how to switch off that stress response. And essentially what we need is definitely we need a COVID vaccination. And that's well in the works right now. But we also need for us to get really prosperous, healthy, happy, vibrant, and make the needed changes to be more efficient and for our country to run better. We need a stress vaccine. And that stress vaccine is about getting into corporations and organizations and say, hey, make resiliency a priority. Have people take 3 to 5 minutes. That's all it takes, 2, 3, 4 minutes, and switch off the stress in their brain. Don't wait until later on in the day to do it, because there will be no later on. All the time that stress is going, the cascade of stress hormones that affects every cell in our body is making us sick, tired, overwhelmed, and addicted. So essentially, when people tell you, hey, what are we going to do about resilience? It gets so complicated. And again, I'm a scientist. I believe in science. And the reason I believe in it is because if you know the mechanism, if you know what's going on, you can do something about it. But essentially, most times when we talk about resilience, it gets so complicated because we're not going into the brain. We're going into all these symptoms of stress and trying to change the symptom rather than doing it the easy way, which is to train the brain. I want to share with you a little bit of this brain science. Essentially, EBT was developed by me and a number of my partners at UCSF who are neurophysiologists. primarily a neuroscientist. It's the only program that covers the entire brain. You're probably used to having people think positive thoughts or be mindfully aware, and all these programs are absolutely great. But when you get to the wild and woolly stress response where people are getting triggered and stuck and stalled, these methods fall short of making us feel better. Essentially, they do not shut off the stress response. There's really good research on that. So this is a problem because everyone thinks, wow, it really works to be relaxed or mindfully aware or think positive thoughts when I'm in low stress. What happened? Something happened. I'm just not the same person. It's because you need a whole set of these tools, including for high stress, in order to really be stress effective. These are the people that whose body of research has led to emotional brain training. I'll be real quick. Peter Sterling discovered that there's something beyond regular balanced homeostasis. It's called allostasis, which means careening out of control. He discovered that in 1988. Nobody knew what to do with it because if your whole body's out of control, and that's the underlying cause of anxiety, depression, overeating, diabetes. Under all of it is stress overload physiologically. Mike Merzenich, good friend, he discovered neuroplasticity. So maybe we could pull some strings in the brain and turn off some of that stress overload. And Igor Mitrovich, my colleague and good friend as well, who is the scientific director of EBT, said, let's keep this simple. There's two kinds of circuits in the brain, the good guys and the bad guys. Let's strengthen the good guys, the resiliency circuits, and let's rewire the ones that get us triggered or stuck or overwhelmed. NYU has done great work in showing that we can change those emotional circuits in the brain, and my focus has been on the tools. Okay, so I want to talk to you about wires because no one talks about wires. I mean, you talk about chemicals. Well, there will never really be a chemical solution to most problems. The reason is because what happens in the brain is something gets me upset. Like I've been, over the last few days, there's been a lot of turmoil, as you well know, related to all the disruption in terms of an unfortunate murder of someone that came down with a lot of other riots and so forth. There's always a lot of stress going on, but that stress goes into the brain and we have a filter. It's the brain, and the emotional brain either assigns that stress to a circuit that works really well or one that works really badly. And that's the rubber's meeting the road when you come into the brain, and what you want to do is get the brain to activate a circuit that takes us through that stress back to that state of connection in just a few minutes instead of getting triggered. Here's the triggered circuit. You can see you just spiral down. It goes into the brain. You start worrying, being upset. The thinking brain goes offline because it's not functioning very well because there's so much stress going on. And so all you do is repeat the same pattern. You've heard people say, why do I keep doing the same thing over and over? It's a circuit. And that circuit pours on chemicals. And so traditionally what we've done in medicine, we teach this to medical students at UCSF. What happens in medicine is we take it at a chemical level. Well, it's kind of like you turn the stress spigot on, and then all these stress chemicals come out, and you're trying to mop up the chemicals. Now that we have neuroplasticity, why not just shut off the circuit? So we stop the problem before it gets started. And essentially, if you're not activating a stress reactive circuit, there's only one other kind of circuit, and those are the good guys that make us really, really connected, present, aware. We lean into doing really, really hard things, but somehow we stay connected, we feel our feelings, and we spiral up to a state of being aware of our purpose and a state of well-being. We want our employees and all of us to have a dominance of these stress resilient circuits in our brain and to clear away the other ones, and we do that through neuroplasticity in the moment. What I mean by that is everyone on this planet has a fair number of these stress reactive circuits because we haven't had a way, other than medications really don't do it. They will help, but essentially creating new circuits has to happen emotionally. And so that's why psychotherapy can be effective. But if we have psychotherapy one-on-one for every employee who has all these stress reactive circuits, I do, you do, they're always being generated by stress overload. You want to clear them away, so you do it preventively as well as therapeutically. The cost is going to be prohibitive, plus it doesn't really work that well. Even if someone goes to therapy every single week, for the rest of their lives. In between sessions, if they don't have the tools to switch off those stress resilient circuits, they're going to walk out of the therapy office, and what's going to happen is they're going to get triggered, and then all week long they could be triggered and causing all that stress reactivity. So this method is kind of under everything. It can be used with medication, psychotherapy, or alone, but we consider it a basic life skill that every employee and every citizen in the United States should have the tools to be able to switch off stress so they can stay connected to themselves, their thinking brain's going to work, and they can bring out the best in themselves and others. I'd like to show you what happens when these two different kinds of circuits get activated. It's really a different world. Now, to orient you to this slide, these are the EBT brain states. There are 5 levels of stress. Low stress is 1, all the way up to high stress, which is 5. If I look at the television last night, which had a lot of very scary images on it, and I had the skills to stay connected to myself emotionally, because all of this is emotional. Thinking is not going to help because the thinking brain is not functioning well in high stress. If I have the skills to be able to activate a stress resilient circuit in low stress, look at what happens to all the areas of my life. I don't have to pick a fight with my husband. I don't have to run to the kitchen to get something to drink or some ice cream, or maybe 3 or 4 ice creams. But once you pass the number 2 level, this is where all the mindfulness thinking, all these methods work great, positive self-talk. And then you get dumped down into this area where everything is extreme and everything is maladaptive, and we just repeat old patterns. So this is what we want to avoid. This also speaks to why you can't just treat one domain of life. If you're in medicine or in healthcare, if you treat a behavioral problem, let's say they're at 4 and they're overeating, or they're overspending, or whatever that person is doing. The reason it's so hard to change a behavior is because it's really about the brain. The problem is they're at brain state, and over time it becomes a habit, set point 4. So relationships aren't working very well, feelings are unbalanced and not effective, and thinking is reactive. So the brain is the main predictor. We change the brain, and then everything else that we do works that much better. So how do you do this? Okay, so what you do is say to people, we got to be resilient. This is really hard. So take a couple minutes here and there, and when you start to feel stressed, just take out your app and figure out what your number is. And the first step, this is really important, is to clear your emotional stress. Remember, all stress, whether it even comes from I right now have a sore hip. So I have stress going into my brain from my hip, right? It goes into my brain. But the circuits in the brain are emotional. So for all people, any kind of stress, physical, metabolic, or emotional, ends up activating really strong, unbalanced emotions that we don't know how to process. And we didn't have this before EBT. We know how to do 1 and 2, but these are new tools that have been developed. They were developed in 2007. And since that time, we've been working on making them very faster and slicker. But if you don't have these tools, what happens is you start ruminating, analyzing what's wrong with you, making lists, and all that does is stress you out even more. If you're at 1 or 2, you know how you feel and what you need. The brain works really well. And then once you get to 3, 4, and 5, when those stress reactive circuits are operating, you only have one need. And that need is to take a couple minutes, process your emotions, and you'll be back to brain state 1 or 2, where your thinking brain turns on, and all those good ideas that you have, you can actually put them into practice. So the first thing you do is de-stress. Okay, and then once you do that, you're thinking well. So there's a little tool, it takes about 45 seconds, and you clarify how you're going to move forward with purpose. And when you finish using this tool, you have a big sense of dopamine and endorphins, because you've not only figured out exactly what you will do that's smart and right and consistent, but also you get a wave of a sense of purpose, which is always dopamine and endorphins. So you're ready to go forward, energized and vibrant. And you score what we say is a joy point. Anyway, a surge of well-being that you just savor for a moment. One moment of that sense of connection empowers you for a long time. So the issue is that these tools affect all people the same. They're the same tools no matter who you are. If you're a child, an adolescent, a young adult, an older adult, someone who's quite aged. The emotional brain is exactly the same. We're all the same in all of this. And so let's talk about some real stories about how this works. Here's employee stress when customers are there. Now, if customers are stressed, there's no wall in the emotional brain. And even if that employee is doing her very, very best to keep a chipper attitude, the stress actually pours into her brain. Secondary stress, that's what's happening. And so she can actually be nice and do what she's supposed to do according to the company protocols. But also the customers are going to see her lips say certain words, and they're going to hear a tone that she sort of puts on to be the way she should be, but they're going to feel her inner life because that's completely contagious. And they're not going to trust that person. If that person isn't in a state of connection where their words are in the same, that reflect what's really going on inside of them, they will distrust and they'll move away. They won't know why they don't like that person or that company, but that will be the answer there. So to give you a sense of that, I have one woman who came in and she said to me, this is employee stress. She said, what happened for me is that I was in a situation where a customer came in and started yelling at me. And this particular employee was a pharmacist. And, I don't take that. But what I needed to do is I actually use the tools in my head in real time. And I connected to myself and I connected to my purpose. And when I did that, I was able to bounce back to a state of about 1 or 2. And I actually felt compassion for them. And I said, gosh, I'm really sorry. And they could tell I meant it. And because they knew I meant it, all of a sudden they melted and the anger in them went away. In other words, one person's functioning gets lopped over into another person's functioning and life goes better. So with employee stress, number one, the employee must stay with the corporate policies without compromising their health. If they're just essentially suppressing their emotions, it's going to come out one way or the other. And eventually it comes back to the corporation. So what you need to do is for people to check in and monitor their number. And if they're at 5, their brain is really not working at all. And so they need to ask for support. There's a certain level of stress where you need to say, I'm going to take a minute here. I'm going to get some support and I will return. But understanding that stress overload state is important to recognize and to support. And then afterwards, if they need to, they can use the app to get some stress relief in just a couple of minutes. And then also, when they come back to a state of connection after that, they're going to be able to say to their other members, I had a really, really upset stressed customer. This is what I did. This is some of what I learned. So there's an openness to being stressed. So we don't have to pretend that we're always at brain state 1 and then pay the price. A big source of stress is employee stress with coworkers or bosses. And I don't think it's a surprise to you to know that we bring all of our experiences, which are essentially stress wires in our brain, with us to work. And that's essentially a gold mine for all of the activations and upsets from earlier in life. And essentially, we got to deal with that. And it's really sticky. And let me tell you why. If we're in an environment where it's not safe to take a break for 2 or 3 minutes and use the app, spiral up, process the emotions in your own head. Remember, the processing is completely silent. You can obviously use these with other people, but they're completely silent. I use it. Sometimes I get up in the middle of the night, I can't sleep. I reach for my app and it puts me right to sleep after I process. No one ever hears me at all. So it's private. This is absolutely important and key for employees. They do not want to be spilling their emotions to other people, someone who might be a peer to them at one time, and other time might be their boss or might be someone who's working for them. So it needs to be totally private, and EBT is totally private. You take the app, you process it in your head. If I did that right now, you would look at me and maybe I was running at 3 or 4 a moment ago and I'm kind of like this, and I'd do my little emotional dance on my app, clear the emotions, and I'd look back at you and the only thing you'd know is that all of a sudden my body language is different. All of a sudden I'm feeling different and you're feeling better because I'm feeling better. So this is private. These things do come up. An example about how serious it is that recently someone came in for coaching. She was a woman who'd been in charge of projects in an organization. And she loved her company. She loved her job. She loved her team. And there was a reorganization, and she got moved to be the project director for another team. Absolute opposite. The people didn't like her. They wouldn't do anything she'd say. And there was really some stonewalling going on. She calls in to do coaching with EBT and learn the tools. And she said, I'm going to leave my job. I just am miserable. I go home every day and I'm at 5. I don't know what I can do. So what happened at that point is she learned the tools. She began to use them. And embedded in these emotions are all these ridiculous old expectations that it used to be that only therapists knew how to change. Those days are gone. At this point, we are able to do far more for ourselves to process our own unconscious, stressed out expectations. And so that's what she did. And she found that what was stressing her out is she was getting her love from her employees. And she changed that wire, that stress reactive wire, into a stress resilient one that gave her the message, I get my love from inside me. And what I do is I do my very best to do a great job to be in integrity. That's what I'm doing here. And when she did that, she could open up and wasn't so hurt by the rejection of the other employees. She won over the employee that really didn't like her, and she ended up really liking her job and staying with her company. When stress goes unsolved, what happens is the manager, the management ends up having to deal with it. And then protocols come in, it gets really expensive, it gets really messy. The whole idea is give the power to the employee. Tell them they matter. Their stress matters. And they can take these little breaks here and there, process problems when it's still done privately before they get to the point that management has to get involved. And it takes a lot off everyone involved and saves a lot of suffering. So essentially with employee stress, appreciate that these circuits are going to come up, and essentially just monitor during the day. When you're feeling stressed, just touch that icon on your app. And if you're really at 5 and you know you're toxic, you know that. You don't have to blame yourself. You don't have to judge yourself, but do something about it so that things don't devolve into more stress overload. And then use the app anytime to get relief, and essentially see that at work, your circuits are going to come up. You are going to use the stress of work in a positive way, because when you use these tools, stress is actually good for you. You clear away those resiliency pathways in your brain, and you end up becoming more and more resilient because you've done the emotional work. Instead of suppressing the emotions, you process them and your brain gets stronger and stronger. What about employee stress with sick patients? This is really, really important because we have so many employees in the hospitals that are under a lot of stress, and they're also under a lot of risk in terms of their own health. I just did a conference last week for San Francisco General Hospital, and in a unit that was involved with a lot of death and dying. And one of the women spoke up, and she said, I have a lot of stress. I have people dying and they can't have their family with them. I'm putting my family at risk. I have a baby at home, and I have an older person at home. And also I have been in remission for cancer, and I felt a lot of pain right now, and I know I'm no longer in remission. So the level of stress is absolutely astronomical, and it's not going to be enough for them just to think their way out of it or to be mindfully aware. Those are fantastic, but we're now in the age of the emotional brain, this part of the brain, the primitive brain, where there's fight or flight responses, and you need emotional tools to process those strong stress drives. So what do you do with employee stress with sick patients? Understand that the patient's stress is going to go into your brain. That is just part of it. There's secondary stress. And so be really careful to take those couple of minutes and process the emotions. And also non-judgment. The basis for EBT is non-judgment and personal power. So be sure that you can say, I'm going to be in brain state 5, and sometimes I'm going to have very strong negative feelings toward patients, or toward other doctors or coworkers. And I'm going to take a break and I'm saying, I'm at brain state 5. I'm not the only one who's at 5 right now. I can use the damage control tool for brain state 5 and begin to move to a higher and better state. Also, in many hospitals, as well as schools and work groups, and some of them, depending upon the work group, they will actually get together and use these tools. I'll give you an example. It's also of a physician, actually. I just heard this the other day. She was again on a coaching call, and she was in a situation where her patients, of course, being children, were really stressed out. The parents are stressed out. Everyone's doing the best they can. But she was so stressed out seeing a young child come in who had been cutting themselves that she just stood at her desk. This is a pediatrician. She got out the app. She put the app on the desk right in front of her, and she started using it. The physician from the next office came over and said, "What are you doing there?" And she says, "It's EBT. You want to do it with me?" And she said, "Yes." And so the two of them went through the little instructions on how to do each step of the tool together. And both of them ended up at brain state 1 of higher purpose, of why they were doing what they're doing, better able to go back and be compassionate and really effective with their patients. The brain state means everything. And people now have the power to get out of 3, 4, and 5 and get to 1. We just need to do it. Also, with employee stress, we're in families that are stressed out. I have 3 children of my own. I know how that goes. And as a parent, I know how it seems like everything that could go wrong, it all goes wrong at once. Now, if this woman is tolerating the stress and just trying to get her work done, she is going to essentially pass her stress on to her children. Her children are going to start acting out and then getting stress symptoms. And then, of course, if she has a partner or husband or wife, what's going to happen is she's going to get in a situation where she's not able to really be loving in that relationship. So essentially, EBT is a family affair, and families do use it together. I was thinking about one particular family that I had contact with the other day, where the wife was working in a spare bedroom. The husband was working in the garage. The 2 kids were in between, and they were 5 and 7, which are not really good ages for being able to self-soothe. And so what happened was they ended up teaching the kids the tools for some of the stress states and sitting together as a family and using some of the emotional tools together. Also, they decided to take turns, and because they were at a higher state, they could make those cooperative plans really, really well without going into power struggles, meltdowns, and the normal things that happen when we're in stress. So with employee stress in their family, essentially the employee wants to keep themselves happy and healthy enough to balance the competing priorities. And there's a lot of those priorities. So again, find out your number and spiral up. But also you can tune in and use these same tools with other people. In other words, the same emotional processes work with other people. So essentially, you can use them with your kids and just say to the kids, are you angry? Yes, I'm angry. I feel angry that, and then sad that, and afraid that, and guilty that. These are the 4 feelings that keep people from getting stuck. And the kids start saying, I feel grateful that, happy that, secure that, and proud of that. And so all of a sudden, this family that's imploding is connecting with each other, and everyone's happier. When they're happier, they're healthier, and they work better. So appreciate that every person has a brain state. You can say, my husband's at 4 right now. I think I'm going to back off. Or my child's at 5. Everybody goes to 5. So this sense of structure and non-judgment is really helpful in helping families cope with stress and get through this time and be stronger for it. So essentially, emotional brain training is more than a method. It's a new paradigm that allows us to take control of the emotional brain, to get up close and friendly with 5 different levels of stress that we can be in. Sometimes we're being activated by a really good resiliency circuit. Other times we're being triggered and going down, but we can do something about it. In 2 to 4 minutes, you can improve your brain state. So that means that you don't have to wait until later in the day to de-stress. You take care of stress as you go. So essentially, it's private. Nobody has to say anything. You can also share it, but you say it inside and it does the same exact job. So essentially, this idea that people can be in control of their own stress, they can clear it throughout the day, all that emotional clutter, and they can find that every time they're stressed and move back to a state of connection, EBT strengthens their brain's resilience. When you move into it and actually have the tools to process it, stress is actually good for you. And when it's good for you, it means your brain is really in balance. So your physical health, your emotional health, and your productivity will be better. So if you're interested in this, the way of exploring it is very simply, people just need the app and they need a little book that tells them how to use it, why it works. We found that people really need to know what's going on inside of them and see lots of stories and examples. So there is an EBT corporate package. The nice part about that is if this system is introduced into your organization, it's very easy for people to get involved. And then if they want more than that, because our EBT.org platform has full services, they can do coaching, they can do intensives where they reset their brain for a state of connection in just 30 days. There's lots of different support available to them, but the start is to get them into the app and the little book, which is the stress vaccine, and have them begin to appreciate how much power they have over their stress and their life. So thank you so much for watching this program. If you have questions, be sure to contact me about the science or the program, or Walt Rose about the corporate package. And the main thing to remember during this time is neuroscience has given us a way to process that high-level stress, and we all need to reboot ourselves. In this culture, we need to reboot ourselves for reality, which is high stress. And when we have the tools, we can use them and move through that stress to make our world and the world a better place.